Hello, Toonami faithful. Welcome to another Anime Convention 2016. And once again, I am here with my good friend, Mr. J. Michael Tatum. It is so good to see you again after a couple of years away. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. It's good to be back. It always feels like home for me.
It does, yes. Well, this is home for me, home for him. And you mentioned a couple of years ago you got family up here, so.
Oh yeah. I have family up here. My sister, my brother's wife's family is from Boston. So this area is very much, every time we come up there, they're like, oh my God, say hello to Mary, say hello to Joe, say hello to this. I don't know, I'm doing a terrible version of the accent. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. It's my favorite accent, but I can't do it very well. So every time I come in here, I feel like I'm a cast member of The Departed.
You know, the Boston accent, I find, ends up being kind of like, almost like a Scottish accent, and then everybody thinks they can do it, yes. But you really can't, because you...
Everyone just says, oh, you parked the car, and they just go, see it, nailed it.
Exactly. So this is going to follow a little bit of a different format. It's going to be standard question and answer. However, this is going to be a bit about LGBT community, the public discourse, and how it pertains to anime and stuff like that. Because as we know, we had a landmark in marriage equality last year, thankfully.
Yes.
So
hyped about that.
Yes, marriage equality is the
freaking time.
a lot of us have said that, and just massive thumbs up.
Yes.
So it is. Yes. Although I believe it was Lucrezia Noyne in Gundam Wing who said it is easier to attain the peace than it is to maintain it. I guess you could say.
Yeah, that seems wise.
Yes. So, we're going to start off with a stupid anime shipping question because I feel like this is a great way to segue in.
Go for it.
You are
Don't scare me.
So we know each other well enough at this point. So,
Yes.
You are the voice of Rei in Free, Eternal Summer.
Right.
And there has been endless thoughts, and everybody is convinced, like Loch Ness Monster convinced, that it is that Nagisa has the hots for Rei, and that they are indeed a couple. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I honestly have not thought about it. Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, I guess there's a possibility. I mean, I don't know. I don't know Nagisa's feelings. I don't know, and God knows Rei. I mean, who knows what Rei's thinking at any given time? Even I mean, I played him and wrote him, so I don't know. I don't know. I guess. I feel weird shipping like teenage boys together. I feel like that's. I feel like I'll leave that to younger people to decide. They're a little out of my age range. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really cool. There are sometimes, speaking of ships in general, I always have a joke whenever like I'm doing like an Attack on Titan panel.
Yes.
Where there's always a ship, like which characters do you ship, and I always kind of go on this semi comic rant about how it's a show up like where everyone is could and many people do in fact die horrible deaths, and it's so heartbreaking and blah 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 and this that and the other, and it's a great show. I'm not trying to down it or bring the room down by talking about it in such a way, but I feel like if all you can think about is who's getting with who, I feel like we've all failed. That's just not what the show's about. You should be depressed, But then I understand, like, the show is so dark that things like that you do just to kind of lighten the tone. The fandom, is encouraged to kind of go like, well, let's give it a little levity by going, well, if they were all still alive. But when on the subject of Attack on Titan, I think I always say that I just ship any of the characters and life. But as far as Rei and Nagisa, I mean, why not? I'm sure they seem to balance each other out. I've known a lot of real life couples in my time that have that dynamic, where there's one who's kind of free spirited and a little impish, and the other one is a little more of a worrywart and a little more. In some ways, it kind of reflects me and Brandon, my partner.
Yes.
I've discovered in life that as far as our relationship is concerned, the roles we play, he is the mechanic, so to speak, and I am the oil light.
Right.
So I'm the one like, there's a problem, fix it, and he fixes it. So yeah, I guess, God, I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, I guess if indeed Nagisa and Rei are a thing, more power to them. But I guess they kind of remind me of me and Brandon. Brandon being Nagisa, because he's got that endless, that boundless energy. And he's like a little puppy. He's like a little puppy right after you get home and they see you for the first time, and then it's like that's his normal. Whereas I'm kind of the I don't even know what the word for that is. That's just that's my personality.
Very
nervous.
Nervous,
neurotic.
a little neurotic, a little introverted, stuff like that.
A little neurotic, a little, always at 10, but not necessarily in a positive way.
Right.
So
there's always the negative 10s.
Yeah, very self-deprecating and very like, no, I couldn't. And I'm also in the sense that I'm a lot like Ray in the sense that I'm very much the person that needs to know everything before I dive in. I'm like, what are the parameters? What are the odds? What are the statistics? What are the equations? How do I trig this? I'm that person. I'm very much not. I don't jump in with both feet unless I know everything there is to know about the jump.
So I had to have that as kind of a lead-in because branching off of that into the topic at hand, when we speak of LGBT rights, anime looks so progressive and stuff, but when you get right down to it, Asia still lags pretty far behind us. Yes. I mean, no offense intended to all of our Asian watchers out there at the Toonami Faithful podcast, but do you think do you fear that there might be, in essence, be a little bit of queer baiting in anime with some of these potential ships?
Now, what do you clarify for me? What do you mean by queer baiting exactly?
There's elements of there's a belief that there is indeed a relationship between two characters, and then out of the blue, it's like, oh, by the way, meet my girlfriend.
I see.
There's been that teasing.
The bait and switch, in other words.
Right,
They're like, are they? Aren't they? That's just life. It's very interesting, and I don't pretend to be anything like an authority on the issue, except, a gay man who works in the industry and has made my own personal observations after, a dozen years of doing this. It feels like longer in some ways, and it feels like a lot shorter in others. I timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, I feel what's very encouraging for me specifically, and I hope for many others, is in anime. Now, here's the thing. Now, as my understanding, and I'm not by any means a cultural spokesperson for Japan. I'm very fond of the culture, but it does. I would agree with you in that it lags behind in terms of the way it tends to personify and grant civil rights to LGBT members of its community. They're getting there slowly but surely, but they're not. The conversation is not the same as it is over here. Like now, we're talking about it openly. We've just gotten, marriage equality is now in effect. These are things that I could not have imagined even being part of the national dialogue, let alone, on the right side of history, even 20 years ago when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up as a gay man coming out in the 90s when most people only knew what a gay person was because they knew what AIDS was, and they identified both with each other. So gay people or LGBT, people were considered, for want of a better word, plague dogs. And having to sort of come into your own under those auspices was a very negative experience. Now, I was very lucky. I had a very understanding family, so when I came out to my family, they were very supportive. But there was this sense of real danger to it. And while that danger, remains for many people all over the world, and even in this country, depending on where you live, I find it's not quite as uniform as it used to be. Like there are more safe places, there are more allies that are more vocal than it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I feel in some ways Japan is sort of where we were with the whole LGBT civil rights issues 15, 20 years ago, which means they have a while to go. They have a ways to go, as do we, incidentally.
Yes.
Still, miles and miles and miles to go. But it's still, I cannot have imagined getting as far as we have so soon. I never thought we'd see marriage equality in my lifetime. I honestly didn't. So I was completely blown away when that finally happened, and very thankful. But what's interesting is that the culture in Japan, if you are an artist or a writer, a creator of any kind, and you want to write an LGBT character into what you're doing and expect it to go mainstream, you have to do it so subtly that it won't be tagged by the censors or it won't be seen, and it's not so much a censorship thing, but I guess, again, and I'm not the authority, so I don't mean to insert my 2 cents as though it's the end-all be-all, but in my experience, when it comes to Japanese culture, gay people are considered figures of ridicule. They're considered comedic. Not across the board and not by everybody, but so I feel that artists... the sense I have is that artists create these characters, and in order to keep them from becoming jokes in the mainstream of their own culture, they sort of subvert the LGBT side of it and just kind of leave it to the imagination, which was something we did here in the States all the time. If there were a gay couple or a gay character in a movie or a show, whatever, and there are. You can go back and look at cinema in the United States in the 1930s, and there were gay characters. But if you didn't know what a gay character was, if you weren't in on the joke, you didn't know. So this way they could kind of slip them in subversively. Now what's interesting about that is when these characters then come over here and are then localized, in a way, and maybe this is, again, just my own experience because I've kind of gone through... Well, I'm totally rambling. Let me stay on. There's right. It's such a huge topic. I could go off in a million different directions and lose my way in every single one of them. But seeing these characters treated like seeing these characters when they're localized into another language, in say this country where anime fans by and large are very LGBT allies, or they're LGBT, they're allies, or they're they have a good sense of it. Like, it is not, they're never surprised or shocked and appalled to learn that a character might be gay or LGBT or whatever.
Some would say that's actually the preferred option among a lot of fans out there.
Sometimes it seems that way, doesn't it? I mean, but what's interesting about that is that the characters rarely are put out there. Obviously, like there's a little, because they can't do that over in Japan. So when they come over here, you're kind of left with this sort of mental space where, like, is he? Isn't he? Is she? Isn't she? Or they? And I think in some ways, for me now, getting back to growing up in the 90s and then in the early aughts. As a gay man, one of the things I went through in my 20s, which is longer ago now than I care to admit, was this idea, like, in order to be accepted, I felt like I had to over-identify with a side of my personality, i.e. my gayness, in a way that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Not because I was worried about wearing it on my sleeve and having people know that I was a gay man and come at me, because I was never really worried about that, because I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very supportive world, little bubble. But I felt like, for me personally, I felt on many levels, and I still feel this way, that my gayness, my queerness, whatever you want to call it, and the name changes all the time, and that's fine. But I feel that side of myself is, I look forward to a time when that part of a person's, that facet of a human being's personality is no more important culturally than shoe size or hair color. Or baldness versus non-baldness, it's that it's just kind of looked at as like we're so comfortable with it that no one, that no young person need to fanatically identify with that side of themselves just in an effort to have a voice and be accepted. So sometimes the trick is, in order to get culturally accepted, that culture has to go through a period where we kind of we fanaticize over identification. So we say, well, no, you are gay, and that's the most important thing about you right now because we're struggling for these rights. And I understand that, but it's kind of a necessary growing pain. But at some point you go, wow, I feel like, in some ways I feel like I spent so much time in my early 20s focusing on being gay that there are other facets of my personality that I didn't get to develop that I only got to develop late, because I was kind of marshaling so much energy into getting comfortable and by extension trying to get the world around me comfortable with this single facet. So all this is just a very roundabout way of saying it's really interesting, and I think encouraging for me to look at characters who we just go, yeah, I mean, they're clearly gay. I mean, it may not be obvious, but we can just it's almost more subversive for being understated, that it's just kind of understood. They don't have to put it out there, and there are in fact many other facets about the character that make them who they are, and their gayness is just one attribute among many that we can discuss for ages, so that they don't become caricatures or cartoons or just simple banners for the gay movement, which is not necessarily a helpful thing. I mean, they can be to a point, but they also need to be real characters, and like any real person, you're more than a label. You're more than you're more than what you identify with at any given time.
Right.
Though of course you are that too, and should live freely in a culture where you can be all of the things. And one of my favorite quotes when it comes to one of these this sort of issue, and I'll kind of end it here. Is Walt Whitman, the famously sexually ambiguous poet, said, quote, well, do I contradict myself? Fine, then I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. We all do. I kind of live by that. So I hope I arrived at some kind of answer to your question. I realize it's such a big
Oh, that's
I'm like,
fantastic.
well, this, that, and the other, and I have no idea what I just said.
Well, in an essence, I probably could have narrowed that question a little bit more, but
it's hard to narrow it down, isn't it? I mean,
it's very difficult.
Yeah, but just to recap, I feel that for young people now, seeing LGBT or potentially LGBT characters in their favorite shows is very meaningful because, one, you feel like, oh, look, I'm represented there. But at the same time, their LGBTness is not the central feature of that character, and it gives the impression that the larger culture is comfortable enough with the concept of LGBT, equality, that it can have these characters and be like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's just, that's part of who they are, and doesn't, if you want to look at them, if you want to interpret them that way, it doesn't spoil the drama at all. It doesn't spoil the original vision, because sometimes, I imagine many times, the creator doesn't intend for a character to come off that way, but they do, and the creator doesn't have final say in how, something they create is received into the wider culture. And it's nice that it can be emphasized without being overemphasized.
So another question on top of that is that, do you think this ambiguousness of LGBT characters could be used to, I hesitate to use the term sexual revolution, but at the same time, do you feel it could be something that could help lead Japan on the path to something like marriage equality, similar to what we had here in the U.S.? Because like you just said, they're about 20, 25 years behind us when it comes to those sort of things.
I mean, potentially, yes. I mean, it just sort of depends. In many, it's not just about whether. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that Japan refuses to believe gay people exist. So they're not. The culture isn't that backwards. And there are some, cultures that are. The gay people don't exist. We have 3 of them, and they're all in prison. Don't worry about it. Kind of thing. There are some countries that are like that still in 2016, and it's scary. And Japan isn't one of them. Japan just kind of is sort of, I mean, they're practical about it. They realize, gay people exist, but we just don't know what to do with them. So they're like, Japan, I think, by and large, not to oversimplify it, but I think Japan treats LGBT people like that weird uncle, he's there, and it's whatever, he's harmless, but they prefer to kind of, not their favorite relative, but he's there for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and
It's nice enough.
Yeah, and it's just different, and I don't know what causes the change. I mean, honestly, I think pop culture representations of LGBT people can only go so far. I mean, it's what's done with those representations and the courage that those representations instill in people struggling with whether or not they come out or fight for civil rights. One of the hardest things growing up as a gay person, as an LGBT person, is not feeling like you have any role models. And God knows LGBT people are not the only disenfranchised community that feels that we are not represented adequately in the wider pop culture milieu. And I think that changes with time. It gets to the point where I think either a generation grows up and says, we're tired of not being able to see ourselves up there, and we know there are people like me still out there that are growing up wondering, where are our role models, and so we make them, and we try to do our best to be those role models. I mean, when I started doing this gig, I didn't think my gayness would be a thing. I didn't think it would ever come up. I've never tried to hide it because I'm beyond that point in my life.
Well, there's no need to, especially at this point in the country's development.
I've never felt like I couldn't be honest about it. But when I suddenly realized, my being out and vocal and incredibly, just nonchalant about my sexuality could conceivably help someone that's struggling with their own, place in the culture. Like, where do they fit? And they can see, hopefully they can look at me and my partner and people like yourself or others and go, wow, there's my tribe's out there. I just don't, my tribe is out there. The world's bigger than I thought it was.
Yes.
And that's the main point that I always try to get to, is that wherever you are in life, the world is bigger than you've been led to believe. And your tribe is out there somewhere. There's somewhere, whoever, whatever you are. That's finding your tribe. That's some of us have to go a long way and have to travel very far to find our tribe. Others not so much, but either way, it's out there.
It certainly is, and and to everybody out there, it really does get better. We promise you it does. There's a reason why people like Tatum and Greg Ayers do those panels and stuff like that, is just co-opting off of that. So another question that you had regarding that could possibly help into go into the mainstream for LGBT people in Japan was another show that you were in, Yurikuma Arashi.
Oh,
where
yes.
Yes. Dude, yes.
My favorite catchphrase ever.
It's hilarious. I love that show. But there was being a Ikuhara show similar to Utena in the 90s. There was a lot of feminist imagery, but also a lot of Yuri imagery and stuff like that. Ikuhara, being the trolling creator that he is, he refuses to expound on anything because he doesn't want to ruin the joke, I guess you could say. Right. But do you feel that Yurikuma is one of those shows that can actually inspire girls to say, hey, you know what, I can explore this part of myself? Grow, yes.
I mean, sure, why not? I mean, it's interesting about culture now is how meta things get, and so something can be a product of a certain movement and also be a comment on the same movement, and that is interesting because that is how movements evolve, and the LGBT movement has certainly evolved, and we've found our allies in unusual places or places that we wouldn't have thought to look 20, 30 years ago. So yeah, it never surprises me. I mean, potentially anything can be used to spark a revolution, whether be it on a personal level or on a wider cultural one. Like anything can do that, and I think artists and creators, writers that make an effort to be part of a movement, but to also comment on it in real time, play a vital role in that process for everybody. Whether we realize it or not, it's always something we can be like, oh, a lot of things like that are designed to be looked at in hindsight, to go, oh, that, of course. Because all these things kind of, and what they're trying to say, or what they have to say to us, really work on a level that's hard to encapsulate in language in real time. Like it does something to you subliminally, and so you act on those impulses, and then later go, oh, that's what that was about. Mm-hmm. I'll be damned. It kind of opens up this freedom by kind of bypassing the intellectual side, and then but then coming in through the back way, so that we suddenly realize, oh, that's what I was doing. That's what this is about. Mm-hmm. Happens to me all the time when I work on shows, and I go, I never really thought that character was gay, but now I realize they certainly could be. And the fact that they could be, or they may or they may not be, is a very interesting statement. And I now have a very different relationship to that character. But it was always there, and I just only now do I realize what that was. It's like, Scooby-Doo, the mask comes off. It was me all along. But yeah, to answer your question, I think anything can be appropriated for the movement, to help. I mean, we take our and something I've noticed about disenfranchised groups in general, but I can say specifically for LGBT people, is that We've learned to take our inspiration where we can, and so we have to get I have found that we're very, very adept at subversively appropriating things. Even sometimes that were designed to mock us, we'll adopt just to steal its thunder. Right. It's, being a kid, and growing up with bullies, I learned to be funny and to get to the punchline before they did and make fun of myself, and then it wasn't fun for them anymore because I took all their best lines. It's in the same way the LGBT movement did. We adopted certain things, certain stances, certain camp, drag, those sorts of things. We took them and we're like, oh, you think this insults us? Hell no, we're just going to embrace this and be this and just show you that no, this is ours now. This was we kind of turned weapons we kind of turn the weapons on the people that wield them at us, rather, or at least we make balloon animals out of them.
Verbal judo, I guess you could probably call it. Yes,
verbal judo. It's an incredible freeing experience to kind of just go, oh, you're making fun of me. I mean, one of the things, and forgive me if this is kind of going off into left field yet again.
No, it's okay.
But something that really helped me get through a lot of the vitriol growing up, and still now, I mean, because still, even now, especially being a public figure of any degree, if you're LGBT, there are always going to be haters and people that have something to say about it. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me. I mean, of course, it doesn't bother me to the degree that it used to when I felt it was everywhere,
right.
As opposed to now, you see it every now and again, of course. But when I was younger, of course, it felt like it was the whole world against me, and that and the few people that I happened to know that shared my sexuality, or at least my sense of disenfranchisement, whatever their sexuality happened to be. I realized a really important part of getting over that, or learning to appropriate it for your own ends, was realizing, that hater's not talking to me. Mm-hmm. They're not talking to me. They're nothing they're saying is being addressed at me. It's being addressed at some phantom in their own head that they've created, that wears my visage, but that's not me. And so it doesn't really apply. And so it's almost like when you can step back from it in that sense and look at it in that way, you don't feel like it's being aimed at you anymore. You feel like, this person is really just talking to something inside of themselves that they can't come to terms with. And I don't mean to suggest that it makes you feel sorry for them, because I don't necessarily believe in that. But sometimes you go, there's no communication going on here, because you're not really talking to me. You're talking to some fiction that you've created in response to something you're dealing with in your own life. And as I've gotten older, I realize maybe sometimes they need that. Maybe there's a person out there that they're being, excuse my language, an asshole, because they're going through something. And if I can be their lightning rod long enough that they actually overhear themselves speak, they might stop and go, what the hell's wrong with me? Why am I saying this? Who am I really saying this to? Mm. So with qualifications, it's important to sometimes be that person's lightning rod, just to give them the space to overhear what they say, because overhearing it, if they really listen to themselves speak, they might change and realize who they're really talking to. Does that make sense?
It certainly does, especially considering, I have said some of those things myself as a stupid kid,
Right.
And
I've said many things that I regret, and I go, why didn't I listen to what I was saying? And only do I hear it in hindsight and go, that was awful, and then I change on account of it. Mm-hmm. But it's the art of self-overhearing. I think the more people do it, the more we grow as a culture.
Exactly. So we're just about to the end of our time. Are there any closing statements you might have on this topic, and to the fans out there who might be struggling with their sexuality, or struggling with something like that,
I could say any number of things. It's hard to just kind of sum up, but I will say, for anyone out there that's struggling with coming out, or just owning who you are, whoever that happens to be, and however you think the world will respond to it, it's important to understand, it's important to not beat yourself up for being afraid, because we're all afraid. People that don't feel fear never have the chance to be courageous, because courage is not about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. And if you just kind of own the fear and learn to walk with it and let it be part of you, and not waste your energy trying to convince yourself and the world that you're not afraid, you can put that energy to better use. And sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help somebody else. So
the best revenge is living well.
True.
In a way. Well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. There we go. Yeah.
I totally dropped your phone.
Hey, that was me. That was me. It's cool. I had to keep track of time some way.
Right.
Exactly. Production notes in the interview. So thank you, everybody, from AAC 2016. We will be seeing you on the podcast.